I call Eugenie Sage.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Pleased to take a short call on the Appropriation 2014-15 Supplementary Estimates Bill, and strongly dispute the cliches that Mr Bishop was rolling out there, and his assertion that this is a government which is a force for a progressive, equitable force for change. Because a number of the appropriations that are in this bill, Mr Speaker, deal with the anchor projects and earthquake recovery in Christchurch. And there, the government is the very opposite of being a progressive force for equity. Instead, a lot of these anchor projects and the cost-sharing agreement that the Crown has made with the Christchurch City Council are about burdening the City Council with substantial debt. And for big projects like the stadium, like the convention centre, where the government is putting a large amount of money into those facilities, like the convention centre, and requiring the council to do the same for the stadium, that's burdening the City Council with debt. It's forcing the City Council in its long-term plan to look at selling the city's assets. That is not promoting equity, Mr Speaker, because rates will then increase if we don't have assets like Orion, the airport company and the port company to provide dividends to the city to reduce the amount of assets that Christchurch residents need to pay. So we see in the Supplementary Estimates Bill quite a few changes: an increase in allocation for earthquake recovery land ownership and management, and another nearly $69 million for the development of the Central City anchor projects. Here, Mr Speaker, there has been a total opaqueness by Sarah and the government over the increasing costs of some of those anchor projects, such as the Convention Centre. When we put in Official Information Act requests, what do we get? Pages of redaction, even when we are asking about what additional funding was allocated in previous financial years to assist the procurement process for the anchor projects. We get denied the business cases, and indeed in select committee, Sarah has said that there won't be any information provided on the business case for things like the convention centre until all the major contracts have been signed. Mr Speaker, that is not good budget management. That is not sound management of public money when costs for things like the anchor projects, the convention centre in particular, look as if they are spiralling out of control from the various comments that have been made in the media, and yet the public cannot see where that $300 million is likely to be going. And in the bill, we also have a $40 million for the ownership and divestment of the anchor projects. And again, there has been a total lack of information from the government over who will own facilities like the stadium, the convention centre, the Metro Sports Centre. We put in Official Information Act requests. They get answered with very little information about the sorts of public-private funding arrangements that the government may be entering into. When we have the Chair of the Chamber of Commerce calling for private sector providers to own libraries in Christchurch, how is there any guarantee that the hundreds of millions of dollars of public money which are in these appropriations going into things like the convention centre will actually end up with an asset that is publicly owned? Or is it being used to subsidise businesses like Accor hotels, which the government wants to operate the convention centre, and to subsidise private interests rather than having publicly owned facilities? There's another item here, $241 million for the procurement and preparation of land and other assets for the development of the anchor projects. Again, Mr Speaker, there's been large areas of land that have just been acquired from the City Council for the Convention Centre, part of Gloucester Street, but without full recompense being paid to the City Council. And then further on in the bill, there are changes to the appropriations which cover more than one financial year in relation to the Avon Otakaro River Precinct. There, Mr Speaker, there have been a petition signed by over 6,000 people calling for the Avon Otakaro Park to be extended beyond the central city out to the sea, yet the government is totally silent on what the future of the residential red zone is when all the former houses have been cleared and people have moved on. Instead of just focusing that Avon River project on the central city and spending some 98 million on 2.5 kilometres of the river in the central city, the government should be looking at how we can have a full river park that goes from the city to the sea, that provides space for natural hazard management in terms of the flooding issues in the Avon Otakaro River, that provides space for community gardens, for public art. But no, again, there is absolute silence on what the government's plans are for the future of that land, despite the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that have been well spent in purchasing the land from the former owners so that they could move on. And again, in the bill, there's a reduction in expenditure for the cost of the bus interchange. That may be because that project's been brought in on time. But there's additional funding being provided for the convention centre. We need, Mr Speaker, to have much more accountability from the government over how these big anchor projects are to be funded. We need the government to actually renegotiate the cost-sharing agreement with the City Council. There's been a major review of the costs of repair of sewage, stormwater and local roads. That report's not public, but the government should be contributing more to the repair of horizontal infrastructure rather than capping its contribution to those costs, rather than putting all of this money into a big stadium that in Christchurch people have clearly signalled the city does not want, does not need, is an extravagance rather than something that is vital to the recovery of the city. And similarly with the convention centre, international experts have said that we will have a glut of convention centres in New Zealand, with the Queenstown one, the Wellington one and the Auckland one, yet this bill is continuing to provide for large amounts of public money to be put into a convention centre in Christchurch, which there's been no opportunity for the public to have any say in the design of, because it's all being pushed through under the emergency legislation rather than the Resource Management Act process, and no opportunity to scrutinise and see a business case which sets out whether there's actually even a sound financial basis for that investment of hundreds of millions of dollars of public money. So, Mr Speaker, there's details about figures in the bill, but not a lot of detail about where this money is going, and the government needs to be much more accountable for the spending of public money.
I call Fletcher Tabato.